Welcome to a new video. What if civilization started over? This series is based on Adizzpro and I wanted to try this out myself. So let's start with this series. What does it all mean maybe? That's maybe a question you have. Well, what if we have a blank world map and I start to draw a little dot right here. This is where my civilization from humanity starts. And eventually this whole map will be colored in. If people know him, he used eventually the series a gray map, where you also make the map eventually white, what they discover, but I didn't really like that myself, so I won't do that here. It all starts right here. A small amount of people started to settle here in the north of Africa. I don't really know the actual names of the countries where they are actually lying in. And there's a small group that started to realize we don't have to go on adventures all the time. We can settle. So in this little tip, they started to make little tents, little buildings. Like, let's say we are at the beginning of the farming revolution. And after a while, the group starts to wander off to the west a little to see what's at this point. And the group here starts to grow as well. And it starts to be like a group of 1 up until 3,000 people. And they want to go to the east as well. And they find this place right here. It becomes a little civilization, what this is all about. But eventually there are 2 young men that wanted to discover more of this world. They don't want to stick around here. So what they do is go to the east, along the coast, so they don't get lost. And eventually they come across a cool place right here. It's a nice area with many fish. They started to gather some fish as well. So these 2 young men started to claim this part of the area, and they started to convince people to come with them to this beautiful place where they found beautiful fish and other stuff that is pretty useful. Geography stuff I will mostly ignore because I'm not that smart. So this is just for fun. So there are like 2 or 3 small settlements now, but these 2 started to grow and started to be as one. Buildings, tents, like people started to build from out of clay. They started to realize we can make sturdy buildings. Here, because of the 2 young men, they made this place bigger and better, and eventually it started to grow rapidly. But they wanted to discover more. They wanted to know what's in the whole world. They don't know about the world, but they know that it goes more down. So what they do, they go on an adventure again. They go along the coast, and after a great while, they find this place down below. 100 kilometers away from the start, well, even more. And they see a little island there. They eventually try to get there, but one of the 2 men sadly died. The other young man started to return back to where he came from, and they realized adventuring this far is maybe dangerous. A great while passes, and eventually the 2 settlements started to grow even more. Like, there are now 10 years past, and there are eventually camps along the way to the one place to the other, and even more camps along the way, so people could eventually reach this beautiful place where one young man returned from 10 years ago. So if we look at the map now, the civilization is like barely anything. Eventually, one man wants to journey off more. So after a long trip, he starts his journey, and he is like walking for months upon months. He is hunting, so he gets some food, and eventually he stops. And he is returning. In the time that he was gone, many new buildings started to pop up in his area, and he realized that traveling this far, you will miss many things back home. And when he got home, he realized they made a place. They made borders, they made fences going around the settlements. There are now 2 big sort of cities, or more like towns. He also realized that people went to the east, but they stopped. While he was going to the west, he wants to know what's in the east, so he does that. And after a long travel, with a few friends, he finally gets what's now known as Morocco and almost sees Spain on the other side. And this place is like the holy grail for all these people that went here. And they want to stay here and want to let the people back home know that this is the place to live. A great while passes and eventually no one really wants to get to this place. We already have 2 settlements and they are a little far apart. And this one is really far away. Why would we go there? But the young man eventually tries to convince people to come with him, and he succeeds. And now there is a 3rd settlement. And, well, let's say time will pass and things will change. After 20 years, these 2 settlements didn't really grow anymore, but this one here in Morocco did. And they even made one of the new people here a leader. And it was the young man that eventually discovered this place. So there was a king. They made him the leader, and eventually that king wasn't really happy about everything, and he started to turn against the people. If one man has the power, most likely he will abuse his power. So what he does, he goes with a little army that he set it up back to where it all began, and he wants people to come with him to the new place. He wants to discover what's on the other side of this water. And let's say people weren't really happy about that here. The king also realized that there were 2 leaders here as well for both settlements, and they went on a little discussion. But while they did, the king turned against these 2 men and killed them both. He wanted all the people to just get away from there to over here. He wants all the people back at home. Why did he do that? Many asked. But he just wants the power and wants everyone under his sleeve. And that's when the 2 sides started to turn against each other. It was pretty clear that the red team now wanted the blue team to cooperate, but the blue team didn't want to. They wanted to stay here. So there were now 2 teams, both on a bad repetition. The red team started to grow rapidly and even made many settlements along the road towards the blue team. But the blue team also started to grow because they also realized being small against now enemies of your own kind is a bad thing. But they were in the upper hand. They had 2 settlements and many more people than the king had. Now after years went by and the king didn't get his happiness he wanted, he started to invade the blue team. With a small army, he started to march towards the first settlement. They came far, but eventually they were getting stopped by people that were fighting back. But also blue started to fight back and eventually got into the red territory. And they just surrounded the old group and eventually killed all the people. The whole little army the king sent. And now a little small army still left was marching towards the king. They didn't want the king to be alive anymore. They wanted to end this war that started to pop up. The blue team was able to get all the way over here, but there was the large army by the red king. And he slaughtered the blue team totally. No one was left. At least he thought. The red team was able to get all his land back and even some more that they started to get because in the beginning of the war. And he thought, well, let's take over this small place. He had a big army and he surrounded the village and he succeeded in capturing everyone that lived there. So now this area was under control of the Red King. One man from the army of the blue team was able to flee into this little village. And he warned everybody to get out of there and just run. We are going to flee, he says. So eventually they get back after many weeks of walking to the place where one man was able to get years before. They started to walk even more and even more. The Red King was not able to follow them or even think where they went. They even thought they went into the desert, but they didn't do that. They went into the east. And eventually the people came across the Great Nile. And it was a great place, and they started to settle here instead of back home. They had a few things along. They brought a few things from back home back to there. Not many people stayed behind, but a few stayed behind because they didn't want to leave their home. And because of that, the red team started to overrun the blue team and captured everybody that was still living there. They didn't kill them because the king wanted people to be alive. And eventually they started to stop, and they had everything they thought. There was no border, no fence here that marked that this was claimed by the blue team, but technically it was labeled as the blue team's area. Years went by and eventually this settlement started to grow, and it was a major settlement. The Red King eventually passed away and a new king was chosen. But they never knew that people were fled to the east. They never even realized they were still alive. They all thought they died into the desert here. Many years went by and eventually the two settlements, the two civilizations were growing. This red area was growing greatly. There was a new king and that king was a more nicer man than the last one. Eventually he passed away as well and a new one was chosen. Until 5 generations nothing really happened. The two civilizations didn't really grow that much either, and no one of the blue team was brave enough to go back to where it all started. But eventually one man did. One young man with a few friends went back to where it all started. So eventually they came across a little gate. It was right here where the blue part ends. They saw big walls, they saw many people, a market, a town. The two towns eventually were built up to be a better place. They were able to surround the gate unseen, and they wandered towards the town where they eventually knew their ancestors were coming from. Nothing out of the ordinary. They knew if they travel along the coast, they eventually get to the place where that evil king lived many, many years ago. But when they did, they realized this was not really a small settlement anymore. This wasn't like a city with a castle, with beautiful homes. And the two men never came back to the blue place. They convinced the people that they came from this little settlement, and the new king that was there believed them, so they could stay. The blue team was growing rapidly as well eventually, but no new settlements were in the makes. They just had one little village. But many people started to get more children, so they wanted to have a new settlement. So they made one right on this tip. There it was, 2 settlements, and they made this the main settlement where the agreements will start. So now there were 2 big settlements, 2 that were actually no more enemies anymore. The red team even got across the ocean and started to claim a land at the other side of Morocco, so-called Spain nowadays. And they went alongside the coast and claimed many land of their own, realizing that there is a much greater world waiting for them. Also, a small settlement of people started to wander into the blue team's territory, but without realizing it was the blue territory. They claimed the spot for their own, and there was no war because no one was living here. But technically it was still blue team's territory. A few hundred kilometers before this great city, they started to settle them. A little place before adventuring even further. They wanted to settle for a while. The blue team didn't know this. And oh boy, what if the red team eventually came across this big place? There were new people. Eventually, the red team ventured and came across a gate right here. They were baffled. There were other people as well in this world. They thought they were on their own. But no, there were more. Without realizing, these were the people that were the great children from the people that fled all those years ago. The leader of this group went to the wall and the gate and saw these people. And he had the knowledge they are from the red team. So what they did was surprising. They killed them all. It was revenge. Time for revenge. So the blue team made a big army and marched towards the well-known Red King. Along the way, without realizing, they got their land back. A few people stayed behind because the red team wanted to settle here as well. But they were getting killed by the blue team. And also back home, the blue team grew a little more along the Nile River. I don't know where it leads, so I'll just guess a little bit. Here along the coast there were people. Here along the coast there were new settlements. Also people were getting at the other side of this small water. And even a few start to wander up into the north. And they stopped right there. But in the meantime, the blue team was all the way over here. And they got to the gate again. Eventually the red king of this place started to know about another settlement far away to the east. I wanted to get there. So without killing the people that were captured here at the gate, the red king started to talk with them and sought an agreement that they won't fight. While this happened, a blue settlement started to still march and travel along the coast. The group started to grow while traveling, because months went by without them knowing what was happening back home or back at the Red King's area. They started to settle at a great place, what's now called Turkey. And they didn't really want to get home anymore. They wanted to settle on their own. So they broke off and never came back home. No one back home was waiting for them, so they just wandered off and made their own place. So now there were a few settlements. Light blue. They claimed all the land up until there and made a little fence, a little gate, with people that will maybe come across this someday, knowing we are here now. So a new settlement was made, actually already two, and in the blue team more were popping up. Also in the red team, eventually a new settlement and another one started to pop up. Many people were coming into this world. This light blue team started to grow their land as well. They didn't really care about their ancestors' war all those years ago. They just wanted to live in a new place. Eventually the people that traveled to this red area were able to get back and let the king here know, the leader, there is no war anymore. There is a whole kingdom there. We can get along now after all those years. But this king was not happy because of that. Because he still wanted revenge for what happened all those years ago. So people that got back weren't really happy. They wanted to get along with each other. So a few people were not happy about that either. They wanted to travel back and started to run over the place and get it all back where it all started for them. So what happened wasn't really great either. There was a split. People started to get angry on the king, but also people were not angry on the king. They were angry at these two groups that were starting to pop up, that were against the king. So now there were four groups. The red team, with a king that didn't want a war anymore after all those years that there was. The blue team that fled because of the original war, and they, well, actually want revenge. The green team that started to pop up in the area that didn't really want a war. They wanted a peace that was actually arranged because of the red king. And a light blue team that didn't know all about this. And next episode you will see what will happen after this. See ya then.